Many times, the legal risk that takes down a business isn't in some new contract or thing that just popped up. It's been festering in old legal documents that haven't been touched in years. The contract that may cost you everything isn't usually the one that's sitting in front of you unsigned. It's usually the one that's been sitting in a folder since your business was half the size it currently is. Most of the time, businesses are not getting blindsided by legal problems that popped up today. They're getting blindsided by legal problems that occurred 2 years ago, and they're just figuring it out. Your legal structure and your contracts probably made sense on the day you opened your business, but they may not make sense anymore. Let's talk about why. At the end of 2025, you probably didn't run a legal risk audit on your company, and probably you never have. So before 2026 goes any further, here's some things you should look at. My name is Dustin Lee. I'm the founding attorney of Ascend Legal Solutions. We're a business law firm here in Houston, Texas. We work on all types of business law issues, everything that you can think of, from your formation, your corporate governance, to your contracts and transactions, and even business disputes and litigation. Everything in this video is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing in this video is legal advice, tax advice, securities advice, financial advice, or any other type of advice. So, if you need advice, go talk to a business lawyer or professional near you to talk about your specific situation. In this video, we're going to go over a straightforward checklist of things that you should be thinking about at least once a year with respect to the legal risk involved in your business. By the time you finish the video, you should know about these topic areas, what to look for, and what to discuss with your legal professional next time you give them a call. Okay, so here's the 5 things that we're going to be covering. First, we're going to be talking about the agreement between the owners. No matter what type of entity you have, there's an agreement, usually a partnership agreement, operating agreement, or bylaws. It's an agreement between the owners as to how things work, like voting, profit and loss, so on and so forth. Second thing is employee and contractor agreements for things that may have unfavorable terms for you. Maybe you just pulled something off of the internet, or you got it from your payroll processor and you didn't have a legal professional draft up something formal for you. It could be that your business has risk with respect to your employment relationships or your contract relationships. Third, similarly, is with your client and vendor contracts. When you first started, you probably didn't even take a second look at any vendor contract you received, and you probably just pulled your client contract off some form you found on the internet. Now that you've grown, these things may not work for you, and they may be leaving yourself at a significant risk compared to your vendors or your clients. Fourth is your regulatory or compliance exposure. Are you doing your proper filings? Are you doing them on time? Is there anything outstanding that you're missing, not filing, or just don't really even know about? Lastly, your insurance coverage. Maybe you don't have any, or maybe you haven't evaluated your coverages in a long time. They may not cover your business for everything that you're doing now. So let's get into it. Okay, first, the ownership agreement between the owners that you signed years ago when you first started your business, and you didn't have any clients or contracts, and you grew a lot since then. That probably doesn't apply very well to your current situation, if you even have one at all. Why is this important? Well, number one, whenever you started your business, you maybe just wrote something down on a napkin, maybe you pulled something off the internet, or maybe you don't have one at all. But the agreement between the owners is extremely important. And even if you did have one originally, it probably doesn't reflect the current way that the business runs. So does it reflect the current authority of all the owners, of all the managers, of all the officers? Does it talk about profit and loss and how those things are actually distributed? Does it talk about the current deal as to the allocation of time, services, and money that everybody puts in? If these things aren't addressed, your old agreement probably is not working for you in your current state of your business. Okay, next is the buy-sell type of provisions that we are looking for in an agreement like this. A lot of times, your standard template agreements don't even address this. So if you've grown a lot since then, or if you didn't really look at it in the first place, buy-sell provisions are incredibly important to have. Buy-sell provisions talk about things like what happens if one partner wants out. Well, what happens if the majority wants to sell? What if the minority doesn't want to sell? Likewise, what if the majority wants to sell and doesn't want the minority to participate? Also, what we're thinking about here is what happens if one of the owners dies or becomes incapacitated, can't work anymore, can't put in capital anymore, can't run the management anymore. These types of things need to be addressed by buy-sell provisions or other ways to address the problems that may pop up in the business. And there's a good chance you didn't address these things when you first drafted your documents. What are the types of things that we're looking for in a review? Well, we're looking, number one, to see if the ownership and management structure is correct and matches what's actually happening today. We look at important things like voting, profit and loss, buy-sell agreements, community property agreements, so on and so forth, to make sure that everything is squared away and make sure that risk is properly allocated and that the company is aware of everything that's going on. Now, you certainly want a legal professional to dive deep into this, because the list of things that need to be included in an agreement like this is just far beyond the scope of what we could put into one video. And you really need advice about your specific situation, not just general information like we're providing here. So get a legal professional to do an audit on your company's operating agreement, partnership agreement, or bylaws, shareholder agreement, whatever you have, and make sure that you get the right thing in place to properly manage risk for your business. At the end of the day, the agreement that you have should properly describe the business and the condition and the agreement that exists today, not what happened years ago. Next, your employee and independent contractor agreements need to be audited. There's a number of things that could pop up that may be potential risk factors, including intellectual property, confidentiality, non-competes, non-solicitation, and others. Okay, the first one is intellectual property ownership. You want to make sure that your employment and especially your independent contractor agreements properly spell out intellectual property ownership, rights, licenses, so on and so forth. You want to make sure that the things that these folks are working on for you don't become their property and not your property, if that's how the arrangement is supposed to be with this person. This is especially important in any industry where you've got creative processes, deliverables, software, something like that, that requires you to create some sort of intellectual property, especially either to use internally for your benefit or to deliver to clients. Next, confidentiality provisions. Good chance you probably didn't even put them in there to start with. But even if you did, the scope of what is confidential, it probably has grown between day one of your business and today. Additionally, the number of people that are touching confidential information in your business probably has grown from day one to today. Number one is everybody that needs to be bound by a confidentiality agreement bound. And then number two, does that confidentiality agreement encompass a large enough scope of items to make sure that all of your confidential information is actually protected? Next, non-competes. There's been a lot of legal changes about non-competes in the last 3 or 4 years. Federal law, Texas law, lots of things have shifted in the non-compete landscape. So it's incredibly important that you revisit your non-competes today to look at whether or not they are still viable, whether they still work for your business, whether they're still enforceable, what needs to be changed, and how potentially you could create an enforceable agreement now. The next big one is misclassification risk, where you're classifying a person as an independent contractor when actually they should be classified as an employee. We have a whole separate video on this if you're interested in a little bit of general information about that. But the main risk is if you have misclassified someone as an independent contractor, you could have risk of back taxes, penalties, fees, so on and so forth. So it's good to evaluate those contractor relationships and make sure that you've got them properly classified. So as you can tell, it's really critical for all these people that have helped you build your business over the years, all the people that are currently working for you and have worked for you, all these things that you need to look at with respect to those employee and contractor relationships are critical risk factors that need to be evaluated at least once a year for your business. Next, your client and your vendor contracts. Now, your client and vendor contracts, put simply, either they're well drafted and they give you leverage, or they're well drafted and they give them leverage. There's not a lot of in between. First point here is limitation of liability clauses. You'll see this a lot with your vendors. I have seen a number of times in 2026 already, a client or a prospective new client comes into my office and they say, I've got a breach of contract with my vendor. It cost me a ton of lost revenue. Let's go after them. Let's sue them. Let's get everything back. And then when you dig into the contract, you see that there are very specific clauses that protect the vendor for things like consequential damages, punitive damages, lost profits, and so on and so forth. And so you need to be very aware of what the vendor is and is not allowed to do in their contract, but also what damages could you get as a result? Because it's possible that you've signed a really bad contract with the vendor, and if they shut your business down, there's nothing you can do. So it's important to look at those vendor contracts and your client contracts at least once a year to evaluate those risk factors. Next, payment terms. Just because you haven't received a complaint from a vendor or a customer about payment terms doesn't mean that you're doing things right. You need to evaluate the payment terms in each contract that you've signed and make sure that those are scheduled and properly handled internally so that you don't end up with any errors in billing your clients, but also you don't miss any payments timely to your vendors. Next thing is IP and deliverable ownership. Maybe sometimes the ownership of these things passes to your client. It's important that your agreement with your client properly spells out what the deal is. So a handful of annual review questions to ask. Let's look at our vendor agreements. Is there any potential risk there? If they shut down our business or if there's any significant interruption of business, are we able to recover for that? Do we need to plan a backup? Do we need to find a new vendor? And the same thing with clients. We need to make sure that the agreements that we have signed with our clients are good for our current business model and that they protect us from unnecessary risk. If they don't, maybe we need to amend those agreements with our clients. Again, this is not every area that you need to be thinking about with respect to your contracts. If you have any questions about that, you need to contact a local lawyer in your area. Okay, next we're talking about regulatory compliance and filings, that type of risk exposure. The types of things that you have been doing all along may not be the right things. Hopefully they are, but it is possible that you have missed some steps along the way. For example, in Texas, every year we have to file what's called a public information report. Most other states do have some sort of annual report that you have to file. If you have not been filing those things, it's possible that your business could have forfeited its privileges to do business in the state, and maybe you don't even know about it. Because a lot of times these things get lost in the mail and you haven't even realized it. And just because you don't realize it doesn't mean the compliance issue doesn't exist. You're required to follow these laws and file these forms regardless of whether you know about the requirements and regardless of whether you received your notice in the mail. One thing to keep in mind is that when your company grows, you hit new thresholds or different laws will apply to your company. For example, specifically at 15 employees and 50 employees, different sets of federal laws will now start to apply to your company, and you may have additional requirements with respect to all of your operational practices. If you have grown through these thresholds and you've not updated your filings, if you've not updated your operational practices, you may be going wrong. So you need to contact an attorney immediately. Data privacy. This is an area that's fast growing, it's fast moving and constantly evolving, especially with AI being here. So it's really important that your business has data safety practices built in to make sure that not only your business's confidential information, but your vendors and your clients' confidential information is safe and protected. It's not being shared in violation of any laws, and it's not being plugged into any open source or publicly available AI software to where other people could eventually get that data out of the software. Lastly, industry-specific licensing. There's a lot of times you may need a specific license to operate in your industry. If you've not been renewing that license and keeping up with it, you potentially could have lost your license. Maybe you don't even know about it. You could potentially put your license in jeopardy at a minimum. So it's always important to check to make sure that you're on top of your licensing at least once a year. You could say that the most expensive compliance problem is the one that you find out about from somebody else after they've come to you, they've told you, they've sued you, they've come to you in a regulatory action, whatever it may be. You need to keep on top of these things at least once a year to not be exposed to that kind of risk. Number 5 is your insurance coverage. Most businesses think they're covered until they file a claim, and then oops, they find out they're not. So first point here, a lot of businesses sign up for a specific amount or type of insurance when they first start, and then they grow far beyond that in the scope of their practice and the scope of the deliverables that they're giving to clients. So maybe you need a policy that has a higher claim amount, a claim payout amount, so that you can cover bigger claims for bigger work that you're doing. Potentially, you're not even doing work that's in the original scope of your insurance, and so you want to make sure that the scope of your insurance covers what you're currently doing. Finally, cyber liability or cyber protection insurance is a new thing that you really ought to be thinking about. It's going to cover you for things like ransomware, malware, other attacks on your business that may end up in the theft or the disclosure of your information, client information, vendor information, whatever it may be. Also, in a lot of industries, your contracts and your insurance sort of are intertwined. So your contracts may require you to carry a certain amount of insurance. And if you haven't made sure to comply with those contracts by increasing or carrying the correct type or amount of insurance, you may be in violation of your contract by not having the correct insurance. Again, you need to evaluate your policy limit versus your actual exposure. So if you're doing $1 million projects and your policy limit's $100,000, obviously that would be a problem. You need to make sure your policy limit covers your actual exposure on the projects that you're working on. So a handful of questions that you may need to ask yourself in an annual review type of situation. Number one, what's my policy limit? Does it recover my actual exposure? Have I talked to my broker lately about what types of insurance coverages I may need? Are the coverages that I'm currently carrying sufficient to cover all the risk allocation that I currently have in my business? Do my contracts currently require any insurance coverage that I don't have? Essentially, insurance is your risk allocation on paper. If your insurance doesn't match the facts of the reality of the current situation of your business, then you need to get it updated. So as you can see, there's a number of things that you need to be evaluating at least once a year to minimize risk for your business, including agreements with the owners, agreements with contractors and employees, agreements with vendors and customers, your regulatory compliance, and your insurance. These things are critical to look at so that you don't expose yourself to unnecessary risk. And if there's one key takeaway that you take away from this entire video, it's that most of these problems and these risks, they don't pop up overnight. They have existed in the documents for years because the documents haven't kept up with the current state of your business. So this is a great video to share with your ops lead, anyone who touches contracts with customers, with vendors, anybody who touches contracts with employees or contractors at your business, to make sure that they have an idea of the things that they need to start thinking about. If you enjoyed the video and you want to find out more about us, go ahead and check the link in the description below. And one more thing, when you're thinking about your current business structure, potentially optimizing for risks and for benefits, you may be looking at your tax treatment. So if you haven't checked that out in a while, we've got a different video about subchapter S tax treatment and some common misconceptions about that.